Welcome back to Courtroom Conversations. I'm Dylan Brooks Hamilton. You can find us on the Classic Courtroom YouTube channel.
And I'm Susan Kelly Ashford.
Today, we're going to be diving into a case that's been in the legal system for 3 decades.
A long time.
It involves a man in Mississippi who's on death row, Charles Ray Crawford.
He is fighting for an appeal.
And what makes this one really fascinating is the argument at the center of it. It's the idea that Crawford received really ineffective legal representation.
Especially when it comes to an insanity defense.
Right. So before we get into it, though, if you like these deep dives into the legal world, hit that like button.
And subscribe to Classic Courtroom for more.
Yes. Okay, so let's set the stage. 1993, we have a 20-year-old college student, Kristy Ray, who was kidnapped and murdered in Mississippi.
Horrible crime.
Yeah. Charles Ray Crawford is arrested the very next day.
And here's where it starts to get a little more complicated. Crawford claims he blacked out, can't remember killing her. And this isn't the first time that he has used this defense.
Yeah, he was actually about to go on trial, right, for assaulting a woman with a hammer.
At the time of his arrest, yes.
At the time of his arrest for this murder, right?
Sure.
And then during that trial, he's convicted of raping a 17-year-old girl who was friends with the woman he assaulted with the hammer.
Yes.
So there's already multiple cases.
Yes. This is important to point out because during the sentencing for Kristy Ray's murder, the jury considered this previous rape conviction
Oh, wow.
as a factor. And this ultimately led to the death penalty. So now, 30 years later, Crawford's lawyers are saying this rape conviction, it should be overturned.
Because of the way his defense was handled
Exactly.
in the raid case.
Yes. They're arguing that his lawyers just didn't properly represent him when it came to a potential insanity defense during that rape trial.
Okay, so what's different now? Is there new evidence?
Not necessarily new evidence, but there's a new look at the existing information.
Okay.
Crawford actually did have a mental evaluation.
He did.
At the state hospital. This was way back then. But his trial judge wouldn't allow him to have any other mental health professionals on his defense team,
Oh, wow.
besides the state's expert.
So the judge limited his access to experts who could potentially support an insanity defense.
That's the argument. So fast forward to now, Crawford's current lawyers have a neurologist, Dr. Siddhartha Nadkarni, who examined him. And Dr. Nadkarni says that Crawford suffers from a seizure disorder.
Okay.
A seizure disorder so severe that he likely didn't even understand his actions at the time of the crimes.
So are they saying if Crawford had had proper representation and access to expert testimony back then, that the outcome of that rape trial could have been very different?
Yes.
And then sentencing for the murder would have been different too.
Precisely. And, you know, the dissenting judges in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals actually highlighted this. They said that Crawford received an inadequately prepared and presented insanity defense.
Wow. So the Mississippi Attorney General still pushing for an execution date despite all of this.
Yes, they are. They're saying that he has exhausted all of his options, but Crawford's lawyers are now taking it to the U.S. Supreme Court.
To the Supreme Court?
Yes.
So what are the chances the Supreme Court will even consider this after all this time?
Well, it's tough to say for sure. The Supreme Court gets thousands of appeals every year.
Right.
And they only choose a very small number to actually hear.
Right.
But cases that have potential constitutional implications like this one, they tend to get their attention.
What do you mean by constitutional implications?
Crawford's lawyers are arguing that his Sixth Amendment right to effective counsel was violated. So they're saying that if his original lawyers had properly investigated and presented an insanity defense, the outcome of the rape trial, and then consequently the sentencing for the murder, could have been very different.
So if the Supreme Court does take this case, what are some possible outcomes we could see?
Well, they could uphold the lower court's decision, saying that they don't see any constitutional violations.
Right.
If that happens, it's likely that he'll face execution.
And what if they side with Crawford?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court could decide to overturn his rape conviction.
Okay.
Which would cast a huge shadow over that death penalty sentence in the murder case. Because remember, that conviction was used as an aggravating factor.
It's incredible to think that a conviction from 30 years ago could unravel this whole case.
It really speaks volumes about how important due process is.
Yeah.
And effective legal representation. Every defendant deserves a fair chance to present their case.
Right.
Regardless of the crime.
And in this case, The argument is that Crawford was denied that fair chance because of inadequate legal counsel.
Especially considering all the complexities of a potential mental health defense.
I want to go back to Dr. Nadkarni's findings for a minute.
Yeah.
His conclusion that Crawford has a severe seizure disorder.
Yeah.
That seems pretty central to this whole appeal. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so Dr. Nadkarni basically concluded that Crawford's seizure disorder is so severe that he wasn't in control of his actions at the time of the crimes. He said that Crawford was laboring under such a defective reason from his seizure disorder that he did not understand the nature and quality of his acts at the time of the crimes. And that's a really powerful statement coming from a medical professional.
It really challenges the whole idea of culpability, right?
Yes.
If someone is truly incapable of understanding their actions due to a medical condition, can they really be held responsible?
That's a huge ethical and legal question.
Yeah.
And it's one that the Supreme Court might actually have to grapple with if they decide to hear this case.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of how we define criminal intent.
Right.
And how we as a society determine punishment.
So as we wait and see what the Supreme Court decides to do, what are some of the key takeaways from this case? What's most important for listeners to understand about all of this?
Well, I think there are a couple of really crucial points. First, this case shows just how important effective legal representation is for everyone, especially when you have these cases that have complicated legal and medical aspects.
Right.
And second, it brings up all these questions about fairness and accuracy in our justice system, particularly when mental health is a factor.
Yeah.
And then finally, it forces us to really confront these ethical dilemmas surrounding culpability and punishment when a defendant's mental state is a big question mark.
It's definitely a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are out of time for today.
We'll be back
with more of these deep dives
into interesting legal cases.
But we want to hear from you before we go. What are your thoughts on Charles Ray Crawford's case?
Do you think that the Supreme Court should hear this appeal? What do you think about the role of mental health in these legal proceedings?
Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video.
And subscribe to Classic Courtroom for more.
Yes, more fascinating explorations of the legal world.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Charles Ray Crawford's case. It's definitely complicated.
It is.
And it brings up a lot of important questions about our justice system.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious and keep those legal minds engaged.